Have you ever wondered what happens when a driver puts in a lap so good that not even his team's own engineers can fully explain where that performance came from? Because that is exactly what happened with Oscar Piastri in qualifying for the Chinese Grand Prix. Inside the McLaren garage there was a reaction that was not simple satisfaction. It was genuine surprise. Nobody expected that the MCL40, a car that the team itself acknowledges is still in the technical understanding phase, could perform at that level on a flying lap. And the most impressive thing was not only the position that Piastri achieved, but the way in which he constructed that lap. While Mercedes seemed to be in another league in Shanghai and especially dominated the last sector of the circuit with a brutal advantage over the rest of the teams, the Australian managed to squeeze every strength of the McLaren in the sectors where the car does work. This left a huge question within the Woking team itself. Are we simply seeing a great lap from a driver in a state of grace? Or has Oscar Piastri actually just revealed a hidden potential of the McLaren that not even its engineers knew was there? To understand why within McLaren there was so much surprise with Oscar Piastri's classification in the Chinese Grand Prix, you must first understand the real context in which the team arrived in Shanghai. Although from the outside it may seem that McLaren is one of the strong cars on the grid, internally the team still considers that its car is far from showing its final form. The MCL40 remains a car that engineers are learning to understand race after race, especially when it comes to the interplay between its aerodynamics, chassis balance and Mercedes engine management. This means that each weekend session is almost an experiment for the team, an opportunity to collect data and discover where the car's limits really lie. And precisely for that reason, when Piastri completed his lap in qualifying, the reaction inside the garage was not the typical satisfaction for a good result. It was something deeper. It was a genuine surprise because the performance that had just appeared on the timing screen was above what the team itself expected with the current technical package. The Chinese Grand Prix also presented a particular challenge for McLaren. Shanghai is an extremely technical circuit, with very different sectors that demand opposite characteristics from the car. The first sector requires great aerodynamic stability in long, fast corners where airflow over the car is key to maintaining speed. The second sector mixes hard braking with changes of direction, testing the mechanical balance of the car. But the third sector is the true judge of performance, with a long straight followed by areas where traction and aerodynamic efficiency mark enormous differences between teams. And that was precisely where Mercedes was demonstrating an almost intimidating superiority throughout the weekend. George Russell had managed to build a brutal advantage in that last sector, reaching differences close to 6/10 with respect to the rest of the grid, something that in Formula One is simply gigantic. With that scenario, the logical thing would have been for McLaren to fight for secondary positions without many options to get closer to the fastest cars. The team's own engineers were aware that the car still does not have the complete aerodynamic package that was planned for this phase of the championship. Many of the improvements that the team wants to introduce are still in development, which means that the MCL40 in China was still operating with a technical base that they consider incomplete. In other words, the car that Piastri pushed to the limit in that qualifying was not even the final version that McLaren hopes to have in the next races. And yet, the Australian managed to extract a performance from him that completely changed the perception of the weekend within the team. What really caught the attention of the engineers was not only the final lap time, but the way in which Piastri built it sector by sector. The data showed something very interesting. The McLaren had particularly strong behavior in the first sector of the circuit, where the car could better exploit its aerodynamic stability and cornering. Piastri was able to take advantage of exactly that strength to build the basis of his fastest lap, gaining time where the car felt most comfortable before tackling areas where other teams had an advantage. That ability to identify the points where the car could attack and where it simply had to survive is what made his lap so impressive from a technical point of view. From within the team, that execution was seen as almost a perfect demonstration of what it means to maximize a car that is not yet fully developed. Because when a driver finishes a lap and claims that the time was reasonable or decent, and that there probably wasn't much more margin in the car, he is sending a very clear message to the engineers. You are saying that you have pushed the car exactly to the limit of what it can offer at that moment. And that's exactly what Piastri hinted at after the qualifying session. The limit that was seen in Shanghai was not in the driver, it was in the car. And yet, the Australian managed to put him in a competitive position against teams that, on paper, had a more complete technical package. That is why qualifying for the Chinese Grand Prix was not simply a good individual performance. It was something more important for McLaren. It was a sign that even before receiving its major aerodynamic upgrades, the MCL40 already has areas where it can compete at the highest level. And if a driver like Oscar Piastri is able to find that hidden performance in a classification as demanding as Shanghai, then the big question that begins to arise within the team is inevitable. If this was possible with a car that is not yet finished, what could happen when McLaren finally unlocks the full potential of its project? Then came the most complicated part. The second sector, and especially the third, were areas where McLaren knew other teams had an advantage. Mercedes, for example, was dominating the last sector with a huge difference compared to the rest of the grid. The data indicated that the German car could gain around 6/10 on that part of the circuit alone, something that would normally be enough to doom any attempt to compete in qualifying. But this is where Piastri's return becomes even more interesting from a technical point of view. Instead of trying to match the absolute speed of his rivals in those areas, the Australian took a completely different approach, minimizing losses. It didn't try to do something the car simply couldn't do. Instead, he concentrated on maintaining the car's stability, avoiding any excessive tire slip and exiting each corner as efficiently as possible to protect speed on the back straight. For McLaren engineers, that approach is exactly what defines a driver capable of extracting maximum performance from a car that is not yet fully developed. Because when the car has clear limitations, the difference between a good lap and an extraordinary lap is not in attacking harder, but in understanding where you can attack and where you simply have to survive. And that was exactly what Piastri's return data reflected. Every braking point was placed with millimeter precision, every corner entry was calculated to maintain the car's balance, and every corner exit was designed to protect speed in areas where the McLaren could not directly compete with faster cars. In fact, when Piastri himself spoke after the session, his words perfectly reflected that feeling. He described his lap as reasonable and decent, but also made it clear that he didn't feel there was much more time available in the car. That statement may seem modest at first glance, but it is actually very technically revealing. When a driver feels that he has extracted practically all the potential of the car, it means that the room for improvement no longer depends on the driving, but on the development of the car. In other words, the current limit is not in the pilot, it is in the machine. And that is precisely the point where the Chinese Grand Prix qualifying begins to have a much greater meaning for McLaren. Because if a driver is able to find that level of performance with a car that the team itself considers still incomplete, then the question that inevitably arises within the technical department is very simple. How much real potential is still hidden in the MCL40? Because if this lap by Piastri was the result of perfect execution on a technical basis that is still developing, then what happened in Shanghai could be much more than a good qualifying. It could be the first sign that McLaren is much closer to the edge of the top teams than even its own engineers thought going into the weekend. In other words, qualifying for the Chinese Grand Prix was not only a demonstration of Oscar Piastri's talent, it was also a small window into the future of the McLaren project. Because if a driver can surprise even his own engineers with a lap performed at the limit of a car that is still in the development phase, then the real question that remains in the air is inevitable. What will happen when that car finally reaches its full potential? When the checkered flag of qualifying fell in Shanghai, many were simply left with the result on the timesheets. A good lap from Oscar Piastri, a competitive position for McLaren, and a weekend that seemed to follow the expected script within the fight between the leading teams. But inside the Woking garage the feeling was different. The engineers knew that what they had just seen wasn't just a good classification. It was a much more interesting signal from a technical point of view. Because the MCL40 is still a car that the team itself considers in the understanding phase, a car that has not yet received all the planned improvements and whose behavior is still being studied race after race. And yet, in those conditions, Piastri was able to push it to a level of performance that even within the team they didn't expect to see so early in the season. That is precisely what makes qualifying for the Chinese Grand Prix of special value to McLaren. It wasn't just a demonstration of speed, it was a demonstration of potential. The Australian managed to squeeze exactly the areas where the car performs best, building an almost perfect lap on a circuit that demands an extremely precise balance between aerodynamics, traction, and efficiency. While other teams dominated certain sectors of the circuit, Piastri found a way to maximize each of the McLaren's strengths and minimize its weaknesses. And when a driver manages to do that with a car that is still in development, the message it sends to the team is very powerful. It means that the basis of the project has something special. For McLaren engineers, that's probably the most important piece of information they took away from Shanghai. Because in Formula One it's not just about where the car is today, but how far it can go tomorrow. And what Piastri's return revealed is that the MCL40 could have more hidden performance than many imagined at the start of the season. If the car is already capable of competing in certain areas of the circuit even before receiving its full package of improvements, then the scope for growth of the project could be considerable in the coming races. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.